Welcome to Art and Scroll Studio. On Wednesday, December 7, 2022, Claude Riedel was our special guest. What follows is the full episode as it appeared at that time. Please subscribe to our channel so you'll be sure to know when we have events coming in the future or watch episodes that have happened in the past. When I think of Claude's work, as I have worked with him and I've looked at his book and pondered what he does, I think of the wonder of sacred spaces and how the architecture and the interior elements combine to create a spiritual experience. Claude's creations meld beautiful materials with light, resulting in something that is multifaceted and an effect that is greater than the sum of its parts. In fact, it's experiential to view one of his works. First of all, because when people have seen the body of your work, they may wonder, did you want to be an artist when you were young?
Yes, and yet it didn't take over my life until later. But yes, I was always inclined to take pieces, found objects, farm implements, whatever I could find wherever I was, and sculpture them into different forms. So I was always looking that way. But as my life went on, and in some amazement, the creation of Nair Tamids became a focal point of my life.
So you started off being engaged in art and in projects that you would see around.
But even then, which means, I became a psychologist, trying to make sense of myself, my own life, the meaning of my experiences. But even then, I was making a small flat stained glass pieces because I was so intrigued by glass and its facets, as you said, and the way light changes and refracts, and it's always been a medium that's just been, very divine to me.
So let me ask you, because I think this is a key question for you and the work that you do, and for our people viewing, what is a Nair Tamid?
So the Nair Tamid is the light, the eternal light that hangs on the front of most Aron Kodeshes in front of the Ark. Sometimes it's on a wall space, sometimes in the center of a building, depending on the architecture. But most of the time, it's hanging directly over the opening of the Ark, where the Torahs are kept, with the sense that the light of God, it represents the presence and the light of God, and shines down on the Torah and on all the congregants.
Is the Nair Tamid ever turned off, or is it always on?
There's a decree in the Torah saying that the light in the temple, is meant to be perpetually. It's the perpetual lamp is another word for it. But an important aspect of that is that it represents both that it's meant to be perpetually on, but it means it's to be perpetually tended. And both, are important, because the tending becomes, sort of a wonderful metaphor for what it means to be human, that we need to tend to ourselves as well as others in order to keep the light on within our souls.
So you work in glass a fair bit. What was your initial attraction to glass? And we'll get into that soon when we start looking at the pieces, but did you want to mention something about your stained glass origins?
Yeah, I made my first small piece after having taken a week-long course at a place where I was working. Made it for my wife, and it was a small outdoor scene. And then people, friends, relatives started to ask me, could I make something for them? And bit by bit, and I worked in a hospital setting for a while, and the chaplain there asked me to make pieces for the hospice unit and the meditation center. My experience just expanded, and I loved working with all the different qualities, the facets, the textures, the colors, and how they changed, from where you're viewing, but through the course of the day. And that's inspiring to me.
That is the most amazing thing about glass. And as we look at your work, we will see how, in fact, one engages with glass in so many different ways, from a distance, from underneath, and certainly as the light refracts through it. When you work on your projects, I just want to ask you one quick question before we go to our visuals. Sometimes you do, and now do we say Nerot Tamid or do you say Ner Tamids? What is your reference?
I'm saying Ner Tamids. I mean, of course, in the Hebrew it should be Nerot Tamids. So
okay, so what is your desire in terms of when you make one just for yourself? Because I know you do make some and then you have them on hand, or you work with commissions. Which do you prefer?
I like doing, you know, both. I mean, they're challenging in different ways. When I'm making pieces just, you know, on my own, I can really listen to and spontaneously try to put things together, perhaps in some new ways, or follow some inclination that I have. When I'm working with clients, which I also love, because their inspiration, their directions, the architecture of the space that I'm working with takes me to new places that I might not otherwise, you know, have gone. So they're both very, very meaningful. So it's a collaborative journey, and even the pieces that I make on my own, you know, sometimes they have to be amended a little to fit, you know, in the setting and the sanctuary and the space. So it's a, you know, it's an ongoing process.
All right, let's take a look at the work and let's go back in history. Can you see my screen?
Yeah. From
okay.
dark. Yep.
So tell us what we're looking at here. We're looking at your origin story. Who are the people in these pictures?
Right. Well, what you see here is my mother and a boat and her grandparents. And the reason this frame in this picture is significant is that this is the time when she and her parents were able to leave Germany, Breslau, Germany, and immigrate in 1938 to Ecuador. And so, you know, my grandfather, Aaron, was arrested on Kristallnacht and taken to Buchenwald concentration camp, where he was the cantor of his synagogue, and he was outside his shop trying to protect it when he was, and trying to protect his synagogue when he was taken away. My mother risked her life to get him out of there, and I'm sure she would have died trying. At the same time, my father was a Polish Catholic, and they were in love in Nazi Germany. And he was part of the socialist resistance and had to leave separately through England. They agreed to reunite in Ecuador if they survived, because it was the only country accepting Jews at that point. And they were able to do that. Lived there for 10 years until her parents died. And then my parents came to the United States, into California, and lived there for 5 years or so before coming to Minnesota.
And then they came and got you.
Right. So part of the story is this is also an adoption story where I was born in Berlin, Germany, and my parents in 1951 through 52, as part of the process, came back to Germany so my father could finish his PhD thesis in musicology, music history, and also with the intention of adopting a child, which was me. And so the picture you see here is me, 2 years old, on the Queen Mary sailing to America. So, and we included these pictures just because they show the importance of nature in my family's life. For my parents, coming from their Holocaust background, to be able to have a cabin, to be able to enjoy the sanctuary, you know, of nature was an amazing, you know, and perhaps unbelievable experience for them. And I found solace in my own, you know, exploring and adventuring in the outdoors. And you'll see in a lot of my artwork that natural forms, you know, are always very, very important to me.
So here we see an image of one of the artists that have influenced you, Alexander Calder, with his amazing mobiles and stabiles that he did, showing the delicate, fine balance that this work, these pieces are held in. And this is where you have spoken to me about your philosophy around how to create a healthy child, what is important. And I love your quote here about the need for predictable safety and resilient human connection. Talk a bit about that and your desire to reflect that in your work.
Well, I ended up specializing in working with early attachment disorder kinds of issues, especially with adoption, but also with any other kind of trauma, because of my own adoption history and trying to make sense of that, and trying to both understand and then learn to recreate and strengthen those missed developmental experiences that we all need, which include that sense of safety and the permanence of our parents, which of course gets disrupted through war, through adoption, through loss and illness, and how to recreate that deep sense of connection and safety in our world. So putting the pieces back together would be another way to say that.
The pieces back together is excellent. And the fact that you're a psychologist, you're able to give language to your art and to what you're striving for, which a lot of artists are seeking. And you come to the work knowing what some of the challenges are of a life that is pulled together. And I love this. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I like this, the delicate balance of the Calder work. And many of his pieces then have a stronger base that they're off of, and that combination of, the delicacy and the strong base that we all need to thrive in the world has been really, really important for me. And the sense of the way that both my psychology life as well as my art life came together wasn't a conscious process. It just was that working on the two, especially as my glass life developed at the same time, it just fit. It just made so much, it felt very comfortable to be working psychologically, but then also very physically, with materials and seeing a permanent outcome of my efforts.
Well, I want to say that your comment about play, having permission to play, you can only really play when you're not under trauma and stress. And so the freedom, the liberation to play, as well as married with being grounded, really creates a solid human being.
Yes.
So tell us now about your first forays into stained glass.
Well, these are, as I said, I did some pieces originally for family and friends. And then these are just two pieces that start to hearken to kind of intimate where I'm heading inside, not all of it conscious again. I'm still amazed by my journey and the process of where this is all led. But here in this tree of life, you could say there are, 6 and then 7 lit branches that represent my own, first menorah form. And then in the other piece, you see this crack in the darkness where the light comes through. That is always the intriguing part, of the tension and the necessity of the light and darkness working together in the space between.
And now this is something this is one of your first pieces. Tell us about how you approach this.
Right. And then, from that flat glass work, eventually a very good family friend, Marshall Furster, invited me and mentored me in working on several Judaic commissions. And so this was a Wall of Joy in B'nai Emet Synagogue in Minneapolis. And it has it's a very earthy with the fish, the giant fish and the peacock, symbolization of life and fertility, and it's the Wall of Joy. And
I love the design of it. Well, if you notice, there's a couple of doors integrated here, but you don't even notice them. They're so well integrated into the design.
Yeah, this was 3 years of my life.
What's that?
3 years of my life built in a very small basement. So, but there it is.
So this is special, I know.
Right. So let me do the backstory here, because the backstory to my entire Ner Tamid life started with my home synagogue, Bet Shalom Synagogue. And when we made the transition from the Jewish Community Center to our first building, after a number of years, the synagogue realized we needed to have something more than a light bulb hanging in the front. And they invited me, knowing I'd been doing some Judaic work and glass work, to make the Ner Tamid. I made it, and I was honored and thrilled to do it. And yet I was also innocent. I didn't really understand what I was touching, what I was creating, until I sat in the sanctuary by myself after the end of services one evening, and was absolutely overwhelmed with feeling and recognition that this light that I was sitting in front of was evoking all the memories of my family's experience in Germany and the Holocaust, all the loss and trauma and joy of my family experience, and that it felt like, oh, here is a way I can contribute. Here is a way I can be of use and join in a deeper way the Jewish community. And at that moment, that very moment, I committed and decided this is what I meant to do with my artwork. And that's all that I've done ever since.
Well, in a way.
So let me finish that. So the photos you just saw that we just went past was the version of that Bet Shalom piece that became grander when we moved to a new sanctuary that we built. And so that was the version in the new sanctuary, which was the one ceremonial art piece the synagogue took with it to the new setting.
And some of these that we're just going to look at now are reflections of suspended Ner Tamids, and again, creating and casting that singular light, which in a way is your statement about hope.
Yes, I mean, they all have that quality of effervescence, of light, of hope. I found in both in my research and in my experience in synagogues that many of the Ner Tamids that were built made in the 1940s or 50s had a certain heaviness or darkness to them, understandably, after the Holocaust and the experiences of our people. And I think, perhaps one of the gifts that I've brought is a lightness, is something that has a little more, if you want to say it, energy and hope, and perhaps innocence to the art form and some beauty. So, and you'll see as you look at my pieces that there's a great variety of styles, because I respond to settings, I respond to the glass pieces that I have, and just kind of let the inspiration and the form and the material, take me. So, and the architecture, because there's a lot of collaboration with the architectural setting and with the people that I'm working with. So
what is very interesting about these Ner Tamids is the so many different elements that come together. For example, you're looking at here, this is a translucent almost disc, but these arms that are coming out, you've got a negative space that is coming into play here, so that the sort of air is flowing in and around it, and it's giving it almost an airy feel, sort of an ethereal floating.
Right. Now, the sense that it's floating, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I love that. But there's lots to talk about. But there's fused glass in that piece. There's blown glass. There's metal work, and they've done pieces with gas, with oil.
Okay, so
and so forth.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I'm sure everyone's thinking, which is, so do you do this whole thing? Like, do you work in your basement and make this whole Ner Tamid, or is this a partnership or collaboration? And do you design it first and then have it made? How does this happen?
Well, this is really an incredible collaboration process. So I work with glass blowers. I do not do the glass blowing, but I've had the good fortune of working with some, extraordinary glass blowers. Sometimes I direct them in the colors and forms that I want. Sometimes I just let them loose, if you want to say it that way, and say, do what, within a certain palette, let's see what you come up with. And then I respond with the frame or the how to hold and what to do with it. So it's a real collaboration. And there's a team that I work with, because I'm dealing with architectural issues. I'm dealing with structural issues. So there's our metal workers, welders that I work with. There are people that help me with some of the stained glass finishing. I make my own chain.
So you do the metal work yourself, right?
I do all the stained glass work on it. And so all the stained glass and fusing elements are mine. So, and then like I said, the chain links are designed by me and then water jet cut. So they're all unique and every piece is different. And no two pieces are really identical because the glass is never identical.
So now we're going to talk about some of your inspiration and where how you get your inspiration from design sources, because we know that you come up with the concept, but talk to us a bit about this sense of the ancient forms.
Right. And just before I even launch into that, I want to say these drawings that you're going to see are done by my daughter-in-law, Siri Preston, who's a wonderful artist, and she helped, and they're all in the book I wrote. And so just like psychologically, we need a strong base in order to be able to go out into the world, to feel joy, to feel, to play. Light needs a strong base to hold it, to contain it, or else flame, which these were all oil-based lamps at one time, needs that container in order to feel and be in his presence and feel safe and relaxed in his presence. And so the bases that I make often hearken to old forms, old oil lamp forms. You can see they're highlighted. And this is a piece in a synagogue in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and 10 yard. And you can see it's very small in the context of it, but a gorgeous, very old synagogue in Sao Paulo.
Very ornate.
Very ornate, and it felt it needed to be, because that was the context of the architecture.
You can definitely see the hearkening back to the ancient forms, but to your point, in this image, we're seeing a lot of the sort of the bases, the way these are held and sort of contained. And right. That is something that you're drawing as a reference from these ancient forms.
Right. So I've taken the ancient forms and then both made them out of glass, stained glass, which is all the work that I'm doing, to give them more light, to have them be more translucent, and then adding glass forms that kind of emanate from those bases. I think of them sometimes as yarmulkes. It's just these beautiful little caps that have geometric qualities that also are inspired with broken glass pieces. We'll talk more about that, but they're the base is what in order to relax with the light, you have to feel a strong base. So,
and I'm going to say that this relates to and harkens back to your philosophy of psychology, which is to have a good foundation. Right. You have a good foundation, you can fly. Right.
You can relax into the world. And here are some other examples of ways in which the light can be held, and that's the Shema going around that piece. And then the one on the right is an old Mexican textile Star of David design that I found that I really loved, and ended up in a Spanish synagogue, Spanish-speaking synagogue in Florida.
It's amazing how many metaphors you can find for these Ner Tamids, how much inspiration it is. I mean, even in a spiritual sense, if I was sitting in this synagogue and looking at this piece, there would be almost a sense of peace, but also energy. Mm-hmm. And you and I have talked about how when you walk around and you see this Ner Tamid, it looks different from every angle. When you get underneath it and you look up, as you're seeing here, you see this amorphous forms, and then here it's more tightly contained. But that's
Right,
one.
and that's very much a part of my design process and thinking, is that I'm designing for the view from the sanctuary, that the light is more pure and clear, and very meditative, relaxing. But then when you get up on the bima and look up, there's this other experience that you have of the universe radiating out infinitely into space, and that kind of references to the Kabbalistic energy, the beginnings of the universe. So, and some more examples of just the caps, and then all of the stained glass and metal work that.
It's very powerful. And I can imagine how this would look in a darkened room. And also with light in the room, because glass transmits and takes light and changes it. And
Right.
just in the way a synagogue and spiritual experience can change you.
Yeah.
Tell me about the Zohar and mysticism.
Well, in the mystical connection in the Zohar, they talk about basically the Big Bang theory, the idea that the universe was formed in a moment of a sudden expansion, sudden explosion, and radiating out in infinite layers of light. And that's what I really try to capture, both that energy, but also that almost all of my pieces, you're looking at them, especially from below, looking at the flame through multiple layers of glass, which refracts, radiates, vibrates their experience.
So to what extent do you anticipate this, or are many of these happy accidents that you talk to your glass blower? To what extent are you expecting these lines, or are they surprises?
A little bit of both, but mostly they're the result of highly skilled glass blowers who I've asked to make things that have described what I just said to you. Make something that has that expansive moving out into the universe and energy, and but without it being garish, in a way that's has energy to it, but is also calming. So yeah, finding the right colors, finding the right mix of textures, and is not every. I have many pieces that didn't make the grade, so to speak, and then sometimes pieces that I put aside and later I think, oh, this would work in combination with this, or something comes together. I sometimes have the experience of shopping in my workshop, I have one piece and put it together with something I had never thought of before, and all of a sudden it comes alive. Because when you're working with glass blowers, you make multiples of everything, because maybe one is the right one, but several others are too big or too small or this, but then you end up with them, and then they come together, and often in later projects.
To what extent does the client tell you, oh, we'd like something inspired by Jewish mysticism, or I think we're going to go to here, these are showing some of that amazing translucence. To what extent does the client drive your design?
Well, they don't entirely drive the design, but how to say this? I'm listening. When I talk to people, whether it's in committees or individuals, because I really enjoy working with art committees and things, I'm asking them, what are the images? What is that the Ner to me, evokes or represents, or what, Torah passages, or what feelings do you want to have in its presence? And then I'm also asking what other pieces that you've seen of my work seem to move you or get your attention or whatever. And so there's a working off of what I've done before, but also listening very, very closely to what they're wanting. And sometimes I go pretty far down the pike and make something. Sometimes it's a bit by bit kind of process of figuring out what they want. And so the tree of life.
Sorry.
Go on.
I was going to say, this is another motif that you're drawn to.
Right. And the tree of life is such a fundamental form. It's trees are mentioned, over and over in the Torah, and the tree of life, in fact, is the original, one of the inspirations for the original form of the menorah, which and you can see it here, the organic kinds of forms. But I wanted to say that the menorah there are representations of menorahs as far back as the Second Temple, and the menorah was the original, the Ner Tamid, and especially with the three outer branches leaning in toward the central branch, which was the shamash. And that shamash over time became what we think of as the Ner Tamid, as more of a single. But here you have a tree of life form that's multiple, repetitions of that in a Star of David kind of form, that just resonated with the setting. So
this is a bit unusual for you, this piece, because that you have this perimeter design, almost this pattern happening,
right,
and then the glow coming from inside.
Yeah, lots of things can inspire.
Well, here's another one.
The rabbi wanted menorahs. So anyway, it comes from, and I listen to what people say. The burning bush is just a remarkably important story for me, because in the Torah, there's the story of Moses, climbing Mount Sinai and coming across the burning bush. And what's special to me in that story is that he notices the burning bush, but then he pauses and perhaps even meditates. And he sits with it long enough to notice that it's burning but not consumed. And that sense of being able to sit with, whether it's one of my lights, or sitting with in nature, to sit and observe and notice what comes to you, over time, takes you deeper into the particulars and what's special, that you might not otherwise notice.
And that's so relevant for our times today.
It is. It really is.
Be able to sit and not fill in all the gaps in the world, just to listen. And I can imagine, if I was in a space with these beautiful glass light items, the hanging, I would be inspired to sit.
Yes. Well, and that's, people sometimes ask me, how does it feel to do this? Or aren't you worried about people liking things you do? And my response is that if I can sit with one of my pieces, if I can have that kind of that meditative, relaxing release in its presence, then I trust it will have that effect on other people too. And so I feel safe or comfortable, letting them go out into the world. So that's how I'm kind of deciding if they're okay, or if they're finished, or
if they speak to you.
If they speak to me.
Have you ever made a piece and said, it's not doing it?
Oh yeah, definitely, and figured out what it was. And sometimes it's a small thing, it's just trying to really pay attention, and sometimes things go off on the sideline for a while, and then some piece or element or aha comes and that transforms it into something that's just right. So yeah. And then this drawing represents the 7 species, where in the Torah, these 7 species are mentioned, various times, and I tried to bring in some of them in my designs. And so you see olive branches and fig leaves and pomegranate seeds and so forth. And just overall, many of my forms feel plant-like, feel tree or plant or blossom-like, a little
organic.
Very organic, yeah.
And I know another influence on you is this, well, and it's, the idea of flight comes to mind, of course, when you see the flickering flames. And I think this, the angels haven't had an impact on your influence. Would that be right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a long prescription in the Torah about how the tabernacle, as the Jews have been forced to flee and leave the second temple behind in its destruction, that there's a long prescription about the elements of the tabernacle, including the broken tablets, the Ner Tamid, and all of a sudden I'm forgetting something. But anyway, but what's special about it to me is the description that on the tabernacle are two cherubim, and the cherubim's wings, hover over, to protect the contents of the tabernacle, and they come close, but they never touch. And it's in that space. There's some marvelous writings about that in the space between those wings, just as you can see here in this photo, lies the divine. It's the space between lightness and dark, between opposites, where the holiness and the unknowable and unspeakable resides. And so I just, I love that. So
that's a beautiful thought. And I know that in our prayer book, we read about how you can't start a fire if all the logs are too close together. It's the space in between that is going to inspire growth and inspire aspiration and flight.
It's beautiful. It's where it gives, where the oxygen comes that allows the flame. And here you have some other versions of those wings of angels, the book and the wings, and then the flame coming out of all of that. And
so this is a very large piece here.
Yeah, this is a very large piece where I had made a smaller version of it, and architects came to me, Mark Levin and his associate came to me and said, "Oh, that's really nice, but we like one 4 times as large." It's like, whoa, so, but you can see why, because it was hanging in the center of their synagogue rather than in front directly in front of the ark. So that required it.
And the shame is that a lot of times these Ner Tamidim, or the Nerot Tamid, a lot of times they are far away from the congregant, whereas this one has brought it right into the middle of the sanctuary. So I have to say how much I love this one here, because it's in Monterey, California. And were you inspired by the natural landscape there?
Absolutely. So what you see is the shoreline, the cliffs coming down, and then a splash of water. I've made a number of pieces that feel very water-like in there, and the explosion of light and glass and flame all together in one form, and then anyway,
So this is a very important story, because the whole idea of your origin story with your grandfather and the Kristallnacht, tell me how that impacted on your designs.
Yeah, this is really in many ways the core of what you'll experience in many of my pieces, because the lives of my family were shattered, as the lives of the entire communities and Jewish people were shattered, and in the same way my life as an infant got off to a rocky start, and it required my putting the pieces of my history and my life and myself back together, and so the sense of in many of my pieces, you see, like in this one, I cut pieces, but not to a design, but I cut them just independently. And then I pieced them back together into something new and something whole, and hopefully even more beautiful than what they were in the first place. So
there's a story here. Yeah,
there's a wonderful story here. This is the story of what I call the Holocaust narrative. Ruth and Walter Elias are seated around me, and they brought me the barbed wire that you see in the hands of the man on the left, who was their guide while they were visiting Ruth made a trip to Poland and Czechoslovakia, searching her parents' history. And her parents were in the Hasag labor camp in Czechoslovakia, and their guide cut off several strips of barbed wire and gave it to them, saying the space would be probably leveled soon for a parking lot or something, and said they should have it. So they came home somewhat uncomfortable with what to do with it. And several years later, they heard me do a presentation about my work, and they said, "That's it." And they showed me the wire, and I was just so moved because here this was this connection to my family of origin, the Holocaust, and I was inspired to create this piece. It's now in Bethel Hebrew congregation in Alexandria, Virginia, and what you see is the barbed wire is incorporated into the chain. I don't know if you can, with your pointer, if you can point it out, but in those long vertical chain links is barbed wire. And the bottom base is black, as you can see again, but then radiates out into light, and so that their experience is the light. It's not healthy or good to deny the past, the darkness, but we don't want it to dominate either. So I honor it, but it's the light that we really, really notice.
It's a tremendous piece because it implies a journey. Yes. And you can see that. You can see that there's growth and there's life and light and hope more than anything in this piece. Yeah, this was so extraordinarily special for me to do. I just felt very grateful for it. So I love this piece because it's in Las Vegas.
Yeah, in Temple Sinai in Las Vegas. Yeah.
And where else would this be?
Yeah, that's kind of how I say it. So anyway, this has over 120 pieces in it. But and part of what's I also added to it is that you can see the blues that come through are actually metal pieces, copper with glass, inserted into the spaces. Right, and so it adds, again, it grounds it in a certain way through that metalwork, but beyond just the light kind of exploding out. So.
Tell this story, and I believe that you have traveled for this story here.
Yeah, this was a very special experience where my wife and I, Laurel, were visiting in Cuba and learned at Beth Shalom, which perhaps many of you have visited. It's the largest remaining synagogue in Cuba, and many congregations go and visit to support it. And while I was there, while we were there traveling, I asked if they needed an Ner Tamid because they'd been doing a lot of reconstruction, and they jumped at the thought of yes. And so I said, okay, I'll make you one. So a year later, we came back, and you see my son, Aaron, and my grandson, Aiden, and my wife, Laurel, and I at the dedication of the Ner Tamid, and here I'm with a worker. And it was a wonderful, very, very meaningful experience to be able to contribute. And here it is, and you see the fig leaf kind of form, but also this broken glass put back together in the arms.
So this is a little bit of a snapshot of what you do and your history also.
Yeah.
But here you're speaking to a group.
Right. So I do a lot of presentations to different art groups, and the community and Judaic groups. And then the middle picture is Laurel and I at the biennial, starting to attend those. Really transformed the course of my artistic life, because suddenly when I had the booth, I needed to have a website, and the website got me into the world. And we made so many great friends, through going there ever since we started in Houston.
So I want to show some of it. Now, do you make these pieces?
Well, on the right, the chain links, I designed them, and then I have them water jet cut, so I can create many different styles. And sometimes I fill the links with glass and other textures. And then you see on the left the copper foil technique that I use to make all of my pieces, and here they are in kind of a rough form, starting to come together before the finished work.
So I want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, to post them in the chat, because we're coming up to question period very soon. And here's a picture of, you tell me what it is, Claude.
I had to include this despite whatever. I call this Wawa still life, because this is in Wawa, Canada, which means goose. And in the forefront on our picnic table, I always bring stained glass materials with me, because I just love to be putting things together, and I'm inspired by the setting. And Laurel is doing a crossword, but in the background is a hunter practicing his bow and arrow shooting before he's going to go out on a bear hunt. So it's like it's all right there.
And that's what we do here in Canada, Claude. That's what,
I know, that's it. So I also have done a number of pieces in settings that are not Judaic. This is in a whatever, all of a sudden, in a nunnery in White Lake, Wisconsin. Suddenly forgetting the name of it here. Yeah, the Sisters of Julian.
Yeah.
And what came out of my making this was Sister Therese who was my contact person, ended up writing a beautiful poetry book, named Ner Tamid. And it was just, and I've enjoyed my relationship with her ever since.
This is your team.
And this is my team. Just, it's people that I've really enjoyed over the years, and how they have the different ways, the photographer that lived across the street from me and now ended up working with me for 30 years, the bronze maker, Brian Leo, who we met at the Kinko's, Laurel discovered at Kinko's accidentally, and then the good fortune of the wonderful glass blowers that I've met, and then Asa, who does my metal welding framework kinds of things.
What I want to do is show people, most importantly, the most amazing book that you could ever see, which is Claude's book. He's an author. This is the book here, just to give you a sense of scale, that it is the most amazing coffee table book that I've seen. I've spent a lot of time looking at these incredible images, and I wanted to bring us to this slide because now's the time that I want to pose some questions to you, if you don't mind, that people have posted in the chat. Are you ready?
Sure.
So people are asking, what kind of light is in the Ner Tamid?
So, I mean, on the one hand, as you could see, some of them are gas, some are oil-based, but the majority of them are electric. And I've gradually moved into using LED lights that are either pole kinds of LED lights or LED bulbs.
One of the questions was that many of the pieces incorporate texts, but when the pieces are installed, they are at an elevation that the texts cannot be read. Is this a concern for you? Or is there a plaque on the wall somewhere that describes the work?
Well, it happens because usually the congregation or the rabbi wants the text to be there. So I try to find an aesthetically pleasing way. There are lots of situations where I'll say, no, there in this particular piece there isn't room or space, or it's too small, as perhaps the viewer is commenting. But most of the time it's a textural experience as much as actually literally, reading the words.
So it's one of those things where it's there, and it's there on a spiritual level, but it's not like doesn't need to be in neon lights.
Right.
The question is, how much do you strive to have your piece fit into an architectural setting? And how much do you feel it is what it is and it's going to fit however it does?
Well, there's it's never it is what it is, but a lot of the time the pieces that I make fit very well into architectural settings. The bronze copper colored of my metalwork and the chain fits very well with a lot of wood arcs, and so that's sometimes an easy fit. But I'm always responding to the architecture, and so the size, the scale of the piece, the height, where it hangs, the colors that I'm pulling from other perhaps stained glass or other elements of the room. So there's a lot of integration that's going on. I'm always responding to the arc doors that often have perhaps a tree of life or some other symbols in them, and trying to respond and have that color and that light kind of flow up naturally. Because in many ways, the Ner Tamid is the shamash that when the doors of the ark are open, that's the rest of the menorah. So between that whole the combination of the Ark and the Torah and the Ner Tamid are really the visual center point or focal point, of the sanctuary, and they have to just feel like, the highest compliment that I've gotten that I love to get is people will say it feels like it belongs here, or it feels like it's always been here. And that really tells me, okay, we've done it.
Well, then you've succeeded. If it
Yeah.
looks like it was meant to be.
Yes, it was meant to be. So that's it. And that's
Another question someone asked is, are there any colors that you think most suit this kind of light that might illuminate in a more sacred way? Are there any colors that you feel speak to you spiritually?
Well, the colors I tend to use are pretty primary. Usually, reds, blues, and yellows with some ambers and a little bit of violets sometimes. Those are just the colors, but they're not. One of the goals is to make something that's subtly beautiful rather than so, so I'm going to say it garishly dramatic that it distracts from prayer. So just trying to find that right balance is important to me.
So basically the harmony you're trying to create is not just within the architecture, but it's within a person's spirit as they sit and contemplate it. Right,
that they have that meditative and relaxing kind of experience that allows them to go deeper in their prayer or their thoughts or the moment.
So I have a couple more, one quick question. Is there any themes that you'd like to explore but haven't? We talked about the burning bush, the broken glass. We talked about the wings of angels and the ancient vessels. Have you ever pondered something and you thought, I should look into that someday?
Well, I can't say that I can think of anything off the top. And those four or five, six themes are pretty universal and take up, are more than enough material for me. But it's true. I'm listening. I'm always listening to stories, or midrash or whatever that speak to me and create some inspiration for whatever comes. So I'm listening, but I'm not seeking at this moment. I wanted to just take a brief moment to express a little piece of joy, or share a little piece of joy that you saw in the pictures of the workers that joined me in making their tamids. I just wanted to show you this little piece, and because the last picture that you saw in there was my granddaughter Charlotte, and in the last few months she's come over to the house and said, "Okay, Opa, I want to go down in the basement. Let's make another Ner Tamid." So we have been making miniature Ner Tamids for the last month or so, and this is one of them. Just
makes you a treasure to have in the family.
Delightful experience. I also, it occurs as things have gone here. I need to acknowledge my parents, Johannes and Sophie Riedel, who adopted me and gave me life, really, the life that I have, and it was such a blessing to be found, by them and sort of inspired by them in this life. So,
well, I think the work that you do is a blessing, Claude, and it is a part of Tikkun Olam. Every time the work of your hands goes out into the world and people are able to feel spiritually touched by what you have created. So I want to thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your brilliance, really, because you're in a class of your own. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us and putting up with our process.
Do you mind if I do a little blessing at the end, just to?
You can. It's your moment.
Just something to say here that's meaningful to me. So I'm going to read this a little bit. In your prayers and meditations, let the comfort of the eternal light remind us and inspire you to light and tend to the Ner Tamid in your own heart, bringing light to darkness, openness to concealment, and study to blind faith. May each of us be in touch with our own internal divine light. May we listen courageously when it speaks, and may we share that light with the world in peace.
Amen.
Amen.